Hello everyone, I'm Amanda Goodman, Curator of Chinese Collections and the International Dunhuang Project at the British Library. And I'm delighted to welcome you today for the second talk of the Georgetown IDP Lecture Series, following the Silk Roads to North America. So this series is organized to celebrate the upcoming completion of the Georgetown IDP North American Silk Road Collections Project, which was co-supervised by Georgetown University and the International Dunhuang Project. The Georgetown IDP North American Collections Project has been generously supported by the Henry Luce Foundation and the Dunhuang Foundation, so thank you to both. And the project began in 2016 and will virtually bring together Silk Road manuscripts and artifacts that are dispersed in North American institutions by incorporating images and metadata about these items into the IDP's public database. So before we start, I wanted to express our gratitude to the Henry Luce Foundation for funding this lecture series. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Amanda Goodman today for this lecture entitled The Many Lives of a Buddhist Devotional Print, a Dated Dunhuang Document in the Royal Ontario Museum Collection. So Amanda Goodman is Assistant Professor of Chinese Buddhism in the Department for the Study of Religion at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on the formative Tang Song transition period of Chinese Buddhism, and specifically the Chinese esoteric or tantric Buddhist traditions of the 8th through to the 10th century. So grounded in the textual and material finds from the Dunhuang Buddhist cave site, her work engages with broader conceptual issues in the study of dissemination and appropriation or alteration of Buddhism across the Sinitic world in the pre-modern period. Amanda is also interested in the cross-cultural transmission of Buddhism along the Old Silk Road and regularly teaches on the topic of Central Asian Buddhism. She's currently preparing a book-length study centered on an indigenous Chinese Buddhist ritual compilation, the Vajrapik scripture, that reflects on regional and trans-regional esoteric Buddhist ritual trends during China's Middle period. So I would like to end by saying that Amanda's presentation will be followed by a Q&A session today. So please don't just put your questions in a Q&A button for us on the screen and we'll be reading them at the end. And so it is now my honor to hand over to Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melody. I'm going to share my screen here quick. Make sure this all works. Yeah, so that works, yeah. So first I would like to thank the sponsors of today's talk for making this series possible, and to Michelle Wang and Melody Dumi and Sia Paneshi for inviting me to share this research. It's a real pleasure to be able to join you today from Toronto and to discuss the only Dunhuang document in a Canadian public institution, a votive print of the Buddhist deity Avalokiteśvara, and you can see the print here on the left of the screen, which was commissioned by the ruler of Dunhuang in the year 947 CE, and which is now housed in the Royal Ontario Museum Collection here in downtown Toronto. As those of you who may have had a chance to visit our fair city and the museum, you might know that the ROM was founded in the year 1914 and is Canada's largest and most comprehensive museum. It's home to a world-class collection of 13 million artworks, cultural objects, and natural history specimens featured in 40 gallery and exhibition spaces. The museum houses more than 40,000 unique objects from the Chinese cultural sphere, including our devotional print from Dunhuang. Now, not only is this devotional Dunhuang print an important material artifact of the forms of Buddhist patronage and practice witnessed along the Old Silk Road. For instance, this woodblock print, and I'll just go back to the original slide so you can see it. This print and copies like it would have functioned as posters that would have been displayed around town and in temples and private homes during the Summer Ghost Festival in the year 947. So the annual Summer Ghost Festival happens usually in July or August, just about this time. And there would have been a real festival-like atmosphere in the oasis town of Dunhuang and nearby regions. So, but it's also remarkable, this document is also a remarkable testament to the many lives and afterlives of the Dunhuang documents as a whole, or as a big collection, since their discovery and dispersal in the early 20th century and the many global networks that they have traveled over the past 100 or so years. This includes the rather circuitous path that took the ROM print from Dunhuang across Eurasia to Britain, to Canada, and now to this virtual platform. And that's part of the story that I'll be telling today. Before I get into the details of the ROM print, however, I would like to acknowledge my research collaborator, Dr. Jessica Lockhart, who wasn't able to join us today, but who is head of research for the Old Books New Science Lab here at the University of Toronto. I met Jess a couple of years ago when she was working in the Old Books lab on campus, and I told her about the Dunhuang ROM print and asked what, if anything, she thought might come of combining our separate projects. Hers, the use of new analytic methods for dating and assessing the materiality of old books and documents, and mine, a historical project centered on reconstructing the transmission of Buddhist traditions in the borderland regions between China and Tibet between the 8th and 10th centuries. So today's talk is a kind of status update on our ongoing conversations about that. So since that first discussion in the lab, both Jess and I have had the good fortune to be part of another project called The Book in the Silk Roads, which is funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation through the University of Toronto and led by Alex Gillespie, Suzanne Akbari, and Sean Makel. The Book in the Silk Roads project focuses on mapping connections between parts of the pre-modern world by describing technologies of the book. And they've generously supported different aspects of our research, so many thanks to the BSR folks. And I'd also just like to say two more things. One, a special thank you to the ROM curator, Dr. Wen-Tian Chang, who's Louise Howley Stone Chair of East Asian Art, and the staff at the ROM for granting us access to the ROM print and for their technical assistance in analyzing the sheet using the ROM facilities. And finally, to Dr. Luk Yu Ping, who's Basil Gray curator at the British Museum, and we'll see what we have to thank her for in a moment. So I'll just begin with a kind of overview of the ROM sheet, and then we can get into some of the mysteries that I think that this document holds and some of the solutions that it possibly grants us as well. So first, just a sort of physical description. This is a printed document made from a wood block on paper with ink and measures 46 by 32 centimeters. So it's quite a nice size sheet. It contains two separate blocks. So an image block on top, which again contains the Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara, or in Chinese, Guanyin, and then a separate text block. And the text of the text block reveals that it was commissioned by the local governor of the Dunhuang region, Cao Yuanzhong, in the year 947. And it also reveals the name of the engraver of the blocks, at least the text blocks, and maybe we might assume the image block as well. And his name is Lei Yan Mei. So his name is revealed here. So there's quite a lot revealed. And in addition, we can take a sort of visual inspection and see that there's some damage. And so when Jess and I first started looking at this object, we started like writing down all the possible questions that we had about it, including what looked like oil stains, puncture holes, and just some sort of natural wear patterns. And just to sort of contextualize the sheet a little bit, here's a sort of partial translation of that text block. Again, I mentioned that a sheet like this would have been one of hundreds, if not thousands, of prints that could have been produced from a single wood block or a set of wood blocks, plastered around the city or displayed around the city or in temples or in private homes on the occasion of the summer high holidays. And Cao Yuanzhong is a pretty well-known figure in local Dunhuang history. And this is part of what the inscription he commissioned says. So Cao Yuanzhong ordered this block to be carved for printing so that the city god may enjoy peace and prosperity, that the whole prefecture may be tranquil, that the highways leading east and west may remain open, that evildoers north and south may be reformed, that diseases may disappear, that the sound of the war gong may no longer be heard, that pleasure may attend both eye and ear, and that all may be steeped in happiness and good fortune. And this was recorded on the 15th day of the 7th moon of Jingwei, the 4th year, Kaiyuan, in the Great Qing Dynasty. So this is August 4th. Oh my gosh, I think today is August 4th. August 4th, 947. And again, it includes the name of the engraver. So not only the date corresponds to us today, but some of the message here as well. So again, this would have been posted in both public and private spaces as part of an annual celebration. And because this talk is more concerned with the materiality of the print rather than its sort of Buddhist context, I'm going to sort of focus on some of the distinguishing features of the physical print itself. So a couple of things just to say out loud here, and then we'll look at some examples of these features, is that there are different layouts. So we have that image block on top and a text block below that, based on some of the physical features that we can see in the ROM sample and some of the other samples that we'll look at from the same print, there were probably multiple methods of displaying this type of object. There's also evidence of folding or rolling. There's a presence of color. We have some examples of prints like this that have been painted or had pigment added to them. We see again different types of wear patterns, water and grease stains, and some examples of recycling of the paper or the addition of recycled paper to create mounts for some of these images. So here again is the front and back, or the recto and verso, of the ROM sheet. And so again, some of those wear patterns, grease marks, and punctures are visible here. But one of the features that I did not pay attention to, and that we often don't pay attention to, but which has sort of led me into this research project, are some of the additional features. And here I'm not talking about the obvious ones, the accretions, and again, the grease or oil marks, but these curatorial marks. And so this is really where Just a Nice project began. So if we look closely, we can see a couple of different stamps and an inscription. And the first stamp we see is from the year 1919, and it says British Museum. And there's a second round seal or stamp here that says British Museum duplicate. So this sort of got me thinking, where are the other copies? And I had this sort of vague idea that there were multiple copies of this print or prints like this that I had seen in catalogs or different exhibitions, Dunhuang materials, but I really didn't have a sort of sense of how many we were talking about. But so this was an interesting clue. And in addition, here on the ROM print, we have the inscription that says received in exchange on December 29th, 1927, and again, a stamp from the Royal Ontario Museum bearing the same date. So this was sort of the beginning again of our research into how this Dunhuang document, the only Dunhuang document in Canada, had ended up in the ROM in Toronto. And here again, we have to thank the curators and the staff at the British Museum, who even during COVID went in and sort of helped us find out what had been exchanged or traded to the British Museum for this Dunhuang print now housed at the ROM. And it turns out that 3 bronze belt fittings, which are pictured here in the slide, were traded to the British Museum in 1927 in exchange for the Dunhuang printed sheet. And these are all early bronze pieces that are not connected to Dunhuang. And so there's a little bit of a story there that we're still trying to put together about how these sort of modern institutions were working together and exchanging objects and building their collection. So that's really a kind of the backdrop of this research project and how we began. So that was sort of a big score that we sort of figured out what this initial trade in 1927 was all about. But then we started looking, and it turns out that we have something like 30 extant print documents related back to that governor of Dunhuang, Cao Yuanzhong, roughly 16 of which are copies of the woodblock that we see in the ROM print. And we see many different configurations and versions of the print. Sometimes we know, sometimes we see just the text block, sometimes we see just the image block, sometimes there's an obvious tear, sometimes there's obvious manipulation or adaptation. So for example, we see the addition of banner tags, we see again the addition of pigment, and we see some very interesting examples that we'll look at in a little bit more detail together in a moment. So we've got 16 copies of the text blocks represented in the ROM print. So that was very exciting. So now we've got the ROM print at Dunhuang, from Dunhuang, sort of now connected to these different prints now scattered across the global Dunhuang collections. But that is not where it ended. I'm not sure why my screen is moving. When I started doing a little bit more digging, I found that there was a second print dated also to the year 947, the same month, also commissioned by the same governor, Cao Yuanzhong, but with a different deity and a different inscription. And this is a single block, so there are some distinguishing features between the ROM image and the Vaishravana print, but very curious that they were both commissioned on the same day. So that is one thing. And start digging again, and we find multiple copies, again, 15 or 16 copies of these circulating in the different Dunhuang collections today in various states of repair. So again, some much clearer, some that look like they are very worn, maybe they were posted outside. We're really not sure, right? And you can see other kinds of distinguishing features like the oil stains, puncture holes, and things like that. So now, Jess and I have two prints. We have the Avalokiteśvara print, one copy of which is housed here locally in Toronto. And we have this set of roughly 15 or 16 Vaishravana prints, which are split between the British Library, the British Museum, I believe, and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. So in total, we've got more than 30 paper artifacts dating to the year 947, all related back to a single figure, and roughly half of which, again, have a named engraver or carver on them. So this is a kind of distribution of where these Dunhuang prints live today. So you can see the range of institutions. And so the Avalokiteśvara prints are scattered in a much sort of wider way, but there's not necessarily more copies of them, which is actually quite interesting. So that tells us, or at least it raises some interesting questions about the collection of these materials and their distribution and how all that worked. You know, were there other deals like that which was made between the ROM and the British Museum for the exchange of items and so on, or were these all collected by Pelliot or Stein and kept sort of together in bundles? We're just not sure. So again, remarkably, more than 30 whole, partial, and compound paper artifacts from printed prayer sheets commissioned by Cao on the same day and year were recovered from Cave 17. Again, as this slide shows, these are now scattered in museums, libraries, and private collections around the world. And these data artifacts point to the mass production of two distinct sets of votive prints in which commemorative blessings for the region are recorded alongside images of either the Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara or the deity Vaishravana. The Avalokiteśvara prints, again, are constructed from two separate blocks, one text, one image, while the Vaishravana prints are made from a single block. Both prints, again, refer to Cao by name, and both appear to have been made by the same engraver, identified only, though, in the Avalokiteśvara samples. So heretofore, the prints from this festival have been studied first as data points about the events of their commission, for what their content and attribution can tell us about issues such as the relative significance of printing to Buddhism in the late 10th century, the mid-10th century when these documents date to, the political relationship between Khotan and Dunhuang in this period. Vaishravana, again, the figure here on the right, was the patron deity of Khotan, an oasis kingdom on the southern Silk Road, whose royal family had intermarried with the Cao clan rulers of Dunhuang. And Cao Yuanzhong himself was married to a member of the Khotanese royal house. And it also reveals a lot about the patron of Cao Yuanzhong himself, whose reign was marked by relative prosperity and advances in agriculture, transportation, and printing. In fact, Cao Yuanzhong not only commissioned the two votive woodblock prints, but he commissioned the printing of the Diamond Sutra, 4 copies of which are preserved from Dunhuang in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. So this is just yet another printed document that includes both Cao Yuanzhong's name, you can see here. So he has made this offering of this text, this printed text. This is dated to the year 949, 950. And again, we have the engraver, the Yaya Leyen Mei. So this is quite a remarkable find. So now we've gone from the ROM print to a set of similar prints to the Vaishravana prints. So now we have a big collection of prints dated to this year. And now we found more printed evidence that sort of links Cao and his engraver. So we were starting to get this really kind of robust picture of the role of printing at Dunhuang in the mid to late 10th century. So, and I just threw this in because a lot of people might be familiar with it, but you know, I believe this is still true, the earliest dated printed book in the world is also from Dunhuang, which is another copy of the Diamond Sutra, which is now housed at the British Library. And this is dated 11 May 868. So this is roughly 80 years earlier than the Diamond Sutra printings commissioned by Cao Yuanzhong. But so within the span of a century, we can really see sort of print technology taking off, and we see a real interest in the Diamond Sutra, in addition to some other printed materials. So more broadly along these lines, these prints also play a role in unfolding the technological history of printing in Eastern Eurasia. And I just wanted to include this photograph. The Buddhists were involved in printing from a very early period and harnessed this sort of very powerful technology to disseminate the teachings of the Buddha. And so we have many examples of wooden printing blocks still extant. The most exceptional collection in South Korea at Haeinsa Temple. And so this would have been used to promote the Dharma and to disseminate sutra copies, and is still well preserved. So questions do remain about how print technology spread, but the role of Buddhism in the development of print technology is well established. Single sheet prints from Dunhuang depict a range of deities and exhibit a range of possible functions and circulation networks. Cao Yuanzhong's 947 CE commission prints can offer insights into local and translocal Buddhist practices related to the production and consumption of these presumably inexpensive, ephemeral and portable pieces. So this is sort of in contrast to this sort of high elite Buddhist kind of woodblock printing that we see represented here by the Tripitaka, or the Buddhist Canon woodblock set at Haeinsa. So these issues converge in a set of so in other words, Buddhists use printing both for ephemeral everyday objects and then also for sort of the mass production of elite publications, right? So there's a variety of uses of printing that the Buddhists are making use of. So these issues converge in a set of fundamental questions about this 947 festival's Avalokiteśvara and Vaishravana prints. Why did the same patron commission apparently at least 2 different prints for the festival, not only of different deities, but of different styles and formats? Why did apparently the same carver create a single block for the Vaishravana print, well matched to the size of its substrate, yet choose the dual block format for the Avalokiteśvara print? And perhaps more tantalizingly, how did so many of these prints, created for a specific ephemeral occasion, survive the 50-odd year interval between 947 CE and their sealing in the Mogao caves circa 1002? And that's sort of the best guess that I'm aware of for the date of the sealing of the library cave at the Mogao cave complex. So what happened to these prints in the intervening period, and how might their stories give us new insights into the communities and individuals who engaged with these prints once they existed? While many of these questions may go unanswered, pieces of these puzzles are preserved in their physical remains. Other scholars have noted the large number of prints that have survived from this occasion. However, to date, no one has brought them together to show how they were distributed or used. Thus, where previous studies have addressed the significance of the 947 Ghost Festival prints on the basis of 1 or 2 specific artifacts, what our study is trying to do is examine the corpus, sort of bringing together as many instances of the prints as the authors have found at the time of writing. So I've identified, I think, 32 in total, but there certainly may be more out there in other collections that we haven't yet had a chance to examine. So again, some of the artifacts that we've come across are fully intact prints, while others are fragments containing only an image or only text. Still others are combinations of what would have been multiple separate prints, subsequently recycled, recrafted, or modified into new devotional objects. The corpus first offers some new insights into the mechanics and pragmatic decisions of their printing. And furthermore, it provides material evidence of use across the stages: dispersal, collection, immurement, second dispersal, and more than 1,000 years in the life of these prints. The scholar Timothy Barrett has speculated that scholars may not fully understand the impact of printing in Dunhuang because its influence may have been felt more in places other than the books of the monastic libraries. And I will admit, I mostly just read those books too. Places that we might find such prints as the ROM Avalokiteśvara print would be ordinary homes, about which we know virtually nothing. So we can't prove whether these prints circulated in ordinary homes, but the artifacts made from them do offer a window into a diversity of use and engagement that has been insufficiently addressed. And so again, that's sort of what we've attempted to do. And I would just say, my guess is that many people who have joined us here today are quite familiar with the Mogao cave site, but I just wanted to show some images because they're always exquisite to behold. So at the Mogao cave site, and here's just a map of Eurasia and a detail of what we typically call the northern and the southern Silk Roads, outlined here in red. And highlighted here is the city of Dunhuang, next to which is the Mogao cave complex. So we often will refer to the Mogao complex as Dunhuang and vice versa, like things get a little mixed up. We also use the term Chenfodong, the Thousand Buddha Cave. So there's quite a number of ways of designating the cave complex from which the manuscripts and art historical materials have been excavated. But so this is the general region that Cao Yuanzhong would have been governor of, okay? And just a little bit of background, again, this is some sort of background information. The materials now comprising the British Library Dunhuang collection were those acquired by Sir Mark R.L. Stein. As you well know, R.L. Stein made 3 major expeditions to Central Asia, and in 1907, I believe, was at Dunhuang procuring items that were then brought back to the institutions in Britain. And this is just this interesting photo of Stein while on one of his expeditions. This is the Mogao Cave Library. This is R.L. Stein's 1907 view of Mogao Cave 16, which is the main chamber here. And of course, this is the side chamber that scholars now refer to as Cave 17, the hidden library cave on the right. And I believe this is a double exposed photograph. So I think Stein superimposed an image of the manuscript bundles on top of an image of Cave 16. So that's how we ended up with that picture. The photograph on the right, of course, is Paul Pelliot, who visited Dunhuang just, I think, a couple of months after Stein, but spent a significant number of weeks reading through the manuscripts that were left behind in 1908. And this is this sort of iconic image of Pelliot seated in the cave library with his candle, surrounded by bundles and booklets, and presumably our ROM print. So 1,000 years ago, our ROM print would have been somewhere here in this cave, along with those 30 odd copies now spread across the globe. So I just want to turn a little bit to thinking more deliberately about the different stages in the life of a Dunhuang print, again, taking our ROM sample as our case study. So we have at least, this is sort of our working model. We have the production phase, which would have included the making of the paper, the woodblock carving, the printing itself, the initial distribution. And again, we can talk a little bit about why we're linking this 947 date to the Ghost Festival of that summer. But we would assume that that sort of distribution, the production distribution, would have happened within days or weeks. Then we have a second initial circulation from production until its deposit in Cave 17. So this would be from the date of the event it was meant to commemorate until circa 1002. Again, the date that we believe the cave library was closed. And the reason that scholars believe that is because I believe this is the latest dated date that we see on the manuscript. It might be 1006. I've read a couple of different accounts of that, but I'm not sure. But so there's a rough sort of 5 decades in between 947 and when we believe that Cave 17 was walled up. And then there's, you know, close to 1,000 years where the prints would have been in storage in Cave 17. And again, we know little about why, what ended up there. But this would have been the relative time span until 1900, when I believe that the cave was probably first opened, and then 1907 when Stein visited. And then the final stage is the retrieval from Cave 17 and the subsequent dispersal. So that's from 1907 and 1908, when Stein, Pelliot, and others visited and took materials and sent them back to Western Europe. So that's another 114 years, give or take. So I just wanted to show a couple of examples that we've been working with to think through both that chronology of the stages of life of a Dunhuang print, and sort of to show you some of the sort of analysis that we've been doing. So this is an example now housed in the British Museum of the same 2 blocks represented in our ROM piece, but to which these banner tabs have been added. So this has been modified. And so we might extrapolate a lot about what is going on here. So were these hung up? Was there a rod used? Where would this have been put on display? So there's all sorts of interesting questions that we're sort of developing and building as we look at the physical objects themselves. And you can see all kinds of accretions here that we can talk about again in a moment. Another exceptional example is also found at the British Museum, Stein painting 244. And this is just a series of 9 image blocks without the text blocks, the accompanying text blocks in the ROM print, pasted together in a sort of collage format. So my collaborator Jess says, you know, while the 947 event may have passed, you know, the power of Guanyin lives forever. So this raises a whole host of questions about who was modifying and manipulating and in possession of either, you know, full prints or the woodblocks themselves in the years after the initial production. And also the variety of, or the different states of the different images also raises questions. So were some of these, again, hung outside and didn't weather so well? Or some newly made to create this collage? Just a whole bunch of interesting questions. This example in Musée Guimet is one to which pigments have been added. And so we also wonder, was this the norm? Are we just looking at the sort of reject badge from the workshop, but that all those that would have been publicly displayed would have been colored in? It's very striking. We also noticed that the margins of this copy have been cut. So it's a much trimmer, tighter looking image. And that also raises, again, a number of interesting questions about the use. One additional thing that we've started to do, and this is also something that is quite common in manuscript studies from Dunhuang, is matching fragments together. So Jess and I, mostly Jess on this one, work together to sort of reunite Pelliot Xinhua 3965, which is 2 image block prints that were glued together here. And you can see a kind of reinforcement to make this sort of booklet that can be opened with the images with the 2 text bottoms. So this is our sort of reconstruction of these 2 prints, which again were put together at some point. And you can notice all the ways in which such an identification is possible. So we have missing corners here. We have fold marks from rolling. We have water damage. We have some oil spots and so forth. So this is the kind of stuff that we've been sort of looking at. So also just to mention quickly some of the analytic methods that we've used, again, through the auspices of the ROM and specifically Janet Cohen and Gwen Adams of the ROM, We had access to a light box, and so looking at the paper itself on which the ROM sample was made, and a microscope to look at some of the accretions that appear on this sample. So when we think about a lot of the paper used at Dunhuang is what we call rag paper. And so it's made from hemp and rami and other natural fibers that grew in the Dunhuang region. And so here you can see a wood inclusion in the paper fibers while under magnification. So this is the kind of testing that Jess and her group have been doing on the piece. We also see, again, lots and lots of oil marks and nail holes. And I want to pay attention to the nail holes here in particular, because this sort of maybe offers us some important clues as to the function and use of these objects. So with, again, the microscope, we've been able to determine that, in fact, some of these do seem to have been accidental rips and tears, and some of them do seem to have been intentional punctures from the front towards the back. So again, the theory being that these were nailed up somewhere or hung for public display or private devotion, something along those lines. And again, just looking at different accretion marks and what this might tell us about the different stages in the life of this document. You know, did this happen during its initial making, during its storage in Dunhuang Cave 17, or since its removal from the site. And again, this is one sort of very exciting example of like 3 weeks was that, you know, it was determined that the ROM sheet had been folded in thirds. So you can definitely see this fold mark, and where this fold mark had occurred, you see a pattern of accretions that look like they were deposited at the same time. So because of COVID, we haven't been able to use all of the scientific methods available to test sort of what, you know, methods which are now, which we might call biocodicology, to sort of think about what kind of animal products might have been used in these accretions, or grease, or what their source was. And so as soon as that kind of testing is available, we will be doing that. Just 2 more quick examples. We have some paper recycling. So here we have an image in the Palais-Chinois collection in France, but it was ripped and torn, and someone repaired it by recycling a piece of paper which was turned upside down. You can see the original stamp and the writing, which again is going the opposite direction of the Avalokiteśvara print. So that's very interesting to think about secondary use of these images. We see doodles that are on single copies alone. We see some burn marks. And so all of this adds up to thinking about big questions. And again, as soon as possible, we'll try to do some more analytic testing once the restrictions are lifted. So I just wanted to read one final section. I know I've gone a bit overboard. So what can and cannot be said about the reception of devotional festival prints like the ROM sample on the basis of these surviving artifacts? There is the story of Cao Yuanzhong and Lei Yanmei, of a contest or experimentation between 2 different print formats and contents to serve the same general purpose, and of a multi-year relationship between a carver and a patron to make both single sheets and whole books to accrue merit for the patron. And there is also the story of this collection, you know, our 30-odd assorted prints. We can already tell that the lives and uses of these prints were not uniform once they were distributed in the community. Some prints were used in some similar ways, but these were most likely not all in the possession of a single institution or entity, at least not for the initial period or years of their existence. It therefore follows that there must have been a story for how they were gathered back together and reunited before or at the occasion of their immurement more than 50 years later in Cave 17. Was this reunion the effort of a single collector? Were a community's papers gathered together and these simply happened to survive separately among them? Further examination of the records of R.L. Stein, Paul Pelliot, and others may yield further information. For example, we have not yet been able to determine whether these copies were found together in the cave or among what other contexts and partners. Finally, a general story arises of preservation, creative adaptation, refurbishment, and use. This is a story that examination of other collections of print artifacts might deepen further. For instance, in a user's additions of matching blue slip backs, by which to hang 2 other paired print runs of different deities from another occasion, the 10th century, now surviving in separate museums. And I apologize, I forgot to put that slide in. So we have other examples of other prints that were manipulated in similar ways and mounted. And so again, raise interesting questions about their afterlives. It is clear from this brief survey that there is a greater diversity and a greater depth of physical evidence for the reception of ephemeral woodblock prints like these than the field of Dunhuang studies has yet had occasion to explore. The kind of examination modeled in this small study may yield new windows into this historical community's reception and preservation of printed devotional materials over time. So thank you, I apologize. Over.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for a great presentation, a wonderful talk. We've got a few questions in the audience, and I mean, if any of you are watching tonight, oh, I see some more coming. So I'll start with the first one, which was, how do you know this item was hanging around the city and around the ghost months?
Yeah, so the date, the 15th day of the 7th month, this is sort of historically like the date of the height of the Ghost Festival, which is really a month-long celebration, sort of where families get together and sort of pay respects and do the proper maintenance on ancestors. And so it's really just that date. I mean, it's a really good question, actually, because there's no reference to the Ghost Festival explicitly in the text block. But so we've sort of reconstructed that based on the date and some of the contents, you know, that Cao Yuanzhong is commissioning this on a big public holiday, wishing everyone well, sort of like a New Year's greeting type of thing. So yes, that is a good question. And that is a little bit of scholarly extrapolation on our part, yes.
Thank you. I think that the other question is also around the fact that how do you know that the item was deposited in the cave around 1002 or before, you know?
Yeah, so we don't actually know. Actually, none of us know when any of the objects in Dunhuang Cave 17 were deposited there, except for items that aren't there, right? So it's actually a kind of red herring to think about. That date of 1002, again, is a rough chronology based on a lot of, you know, several generations of Dunhuang scholars who worked closely with the manuscripts and again amassed a sort of range of dates that exist. So we don't have any dated manuscripts past the year 1002. And there are historical events that have been proposed to explain why this year also makes sense. There's sort of a transition of power locally within the Cao clan at this time. So it, you know, the short answer about 1002 is we don't really know. It could have been deposited earlier than that as well, but probably not later. Yeah.
Thank you. We have also a few questions from Yongmo. So I'll start with, thank you very much for such an interesting presentation. And then there's a few questions. I don't know if you want me to break them up for you. The first one is, how do we assume, if we are assuming, that these devotional prints were circulated and then stored in Cave 17?
Yeah, so.
Yeah, is there any active evidence that they were indeed circulated? And if so, among whom, and in what way, whether they were, you know, purchased or anything?
Yeah, we don't, as far as I know, yeah, that's a great point, Melody. We have not, although it could absolutely exist, we have not uncovered any information from the local workshops or anything related to that, the name of that engraver, Lei Mei himself, that would tell us that much or those sorts of details about the production side of things. So where exactly they would have been produced in the region, you know, what specific workshop, or how much they would have cost, or what the print run would have looked like. So I think scholars, sort of book historians, say that a good woodblock print can print something like, you know, up to something like 40,000 prints, you know, with a single carving. So there could have been hundreds, if not thousands, of these produced. I mean, yeah, we are putting together a story based on fragmentary evidence. But I think that the best evidence for the circulation history of the individual prints that are extant is their multiple forms, right? So when we see the manipulation of a document, we see sort of the sort of complete original form, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, extant in several samples. set against examples that were highly modified, set against examples which show what looks like, incredible fading next to other examples which were painted next to other examples which have, nail holes or pinholes. I think that that's pretty convincing circumstantial evidence. That's how I'm putting it. And that's where I think the sort of non-destructive scientific analysis can be most helpful in the long run. So we're still in the early stages of putting this set of materials together and identifying them by date and name and by this event. But I think that once we put them all together and are able to do all those different types of testing, we'll come up with maybe not hard answers, but some convincing soft answers that, again, together add up to a pretty convincing story.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I do think, yeah.
That this, so because I've only read part of that long question from Jung. So the second one was, well, the second or third was, can those markings, so water damage, fault lines, oil accretions, and so on, tell us anything about the items having gone through different hands and lives? And if those ephemeras were circulated, why and how were they recollected then and put into storage?
Yeah, these are all the working questions that we're using as well. I mean, there are a couple of very convincing, what look like mini bundles of the Avalokiteśvara print. So there is a little bit of evidence based on what looks like an oil mark that is sort of soaked through a couple of different copies, that they were sort of folded up together and maybe crushed even a little bit, and that some type of oil permeated all the copies that were sort of arranged in that bundle. Again, sort of imagining the bundle and exactly where and when it was, but there is evidence. Again, you can use sort of scientific analysis and visual analysis to sort of see the oil stains. And so if you fold several of the copies up and you put them together, yes, you can see. So whether that happened prior to their deposition in the cave library or after they were removed, we still don't know, and I'm not sure that we'll ever be able to tell that exactly. Although, again, with some of the biocriticological testing that's possible eventually, maybe some of these things won't seem far-fetched in terms of coming up with concrete answers. But yeah, I definitely think that you can see not a complete picture, but you can put together different pieces of the puzzle of the different hands and the way that certain numbers or items within these sets circulated together or were stored together. That for sure you can see. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So what question from me, so what do you think these oil marks were? What caused them? Because you see them also on a lot of the manuscripts.
Yeah, so there's probably just a couple of options. I don't know. I mean, we've been thinking because these were sort of posters, and I mean, this is a point that I forgot to make, I think, earlier, which is that one thing that's so striking about these is just the sheer number of them. I mean, if you could make something like 40,000 prints from a single woodblock, then finding 32 copies is not that exceptional, except that it is, right? It is quite exceptional to have this number of materials left, and to have this much printed material at Dunhuang. I mean, as a manuscript scholar, as a textualist, I'm very excited by the 50,000 odd manuscripts that were coming from the site, but we have a lot of print evidence as well. So the fact that we see similar types of, we'll just call them modifications, happening to both the handwritten documents and these print items does to me suggest that they were stored together and or treated in similar fashion. So whether that was in the context of a private house, where all kinds of oils might have found their way onto these manuscripts that were circulating in private hands, or whether they were near, whether these Avalokiteśvara prints were near a stove, and this is cooking oil, or whether they were in a sort of temple context and there was some kind of illumination happening that used some kind of oil. Again, that's where the sort of biocriticology will come in and potentially have some real answers for us. But I do think that just noticing the point that you made is really important, that we do see similar types of patterned accretions on the handwritten documents as well. So it's not just the set of print documents from the site.
Thank you. We've got one more question in the Q&A box, but also one in the chat. So I'll read the one from the chat that came first. So it's from Dilara asking, could you please give us some information about recycled texts or papers? Are those texts on recycled papers all Chinese?
Are they all Chinese? I am not sure. For sure, the local community at Dunhuang was recycling both Chinese and Tibetan documents beginning in the 8th century. And by the 10th century, the practice of recycling is very common on the manuscript. So it's very, very common that you will have a nice professionally copied, sutra produced in 7th, 8th century that at some point in the mid to late 10th century is reversed and used by a non-professional scribe to inscribe some type of text. That's a very common occurrence in the late 10th century. So the fact that we see, and where we see it in these prints is in 2 instances. We see it and in this case, they are all Chinese documents that have been recycled and then used to create borders or mounts for the Avalokiteśvara print. So we see that. And then in that one case that I showed, a recycled Chinese manuscript was sort of rearranged and cut up and used to sort of paste together or repair a ripped Avalokiteśvara print. So yeah, they are mostly Chinese, but we do see recycling of Tibetan materials as well. And the height of that practice of recycling manuscripts, which might tell us a lot about the sort of availability and circulation of paper in the late 10th century is markedly it's a very common practice in the late 10th century.
Thank you. Got 2 questions from Judith. So the first one is, what do we currently know about why all the prints and documents had to be sealed away in the 11th century?
Yeah, so again, there's a couple of theories, some very prominent ones that were put out there. And, I don't have an answer to that question, but some of the theories were that some of the neighboring oasis kingdoms on the Southern Silk Road were under imminent threat. And so, this is one of the early theories that Dunhuang was sort of closing down in certain respects, and that this cache of manuscripts that for whatever reason and during whatever process had been put into what we now call Cave 17 had to be walled up. I find this quite unconvincing myself, given the variety and range of materials that we have, which includes materials in something like a dozen different languages, Buddhist, non-Buddhist, secular documents, receipts, all kinds of things. So I'm not sure. One of the interesting sort of comparisons that can be made is something like the Cairo Geneza, right? Where you have this sort of sacred repository of text that can't be thrown away. So you wouldn't just throw away a Buddhist scripture. And so many of the objects, again, in Cave 17 are in disrepair. So they may have been put there to be repaired later or to be used as scrap paper. We just don't know. We don't know. But I think this kind of work will help. And why we have these print documents, the fact that we have so many of these print documents alone is quite remarkable, and something I don't think that people have sort of put together. And the farther we go in the 10th century, the more printed materials we see at Dunhuang, including amulets and different sort of tantric or esoteric imagery that's being printed up and worn, again, in amulets or copied for merit. So there's a lot of print material that does make its way into the cave by 1002. It could have been something as simple as it got full. I'm not entirely sure. But we do know a little bit about the history of Cave 17, which was not built to be a library cave at all. It was built to be a sort of memorial chapel for an eminent local monk at the site. And so, again, scholars have worked on that. So sorry, no, I have no hard answers for anyone.
I know, it's always what happens when it comes from material from Cave 17. So another last question from Judith is, what have you learned about the transmission of Vajrayana Buddhism along the Silk Road from these prints?
Yeah, I have learned that the Vajrayana prints that I am more familiar with are part of a cluster or a group or a subset, maybe even, of print documents that were circulating in Dunhuang from, during the 9th and the 10th centuries. So it sort of provides with a bigger context. It doesn't necessarily shed light on the sort of content of the Vajrayana or esoteric prints that I look at, which again are mostly amulets and other kinds of ritual paraphernalia. But it does contextualize those. So when we think about, the technology of print, right, that those sort of esoteric samples are a lot less sort of exotic and part, again, of a sort of broader trend at the site to disseminate Buddhist teachings from a variety of different traditions. So I guess that would be my answer. So here we have sort of popular lay posters that are being printed up, possibly even in the same workshops alongside these sort of amulets. So it just raises, again, more questions for us to think with.
Well, thank you, Amanda. I think that's possibly all we've got in terms of times for questions tonight. But people in the audience are more than welcome to follow up with us after this. You can email idp@bl.uk if you have any questions for Amanda, and we'll pass them on. So please feel free to contact us after the talk. And yes, Amanda, thank you so much. And it's wonderful that actually Sia managed to schedule your talk on the 4th of August. I don't think.
Yeah, I did not put that together until I said it. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. And thanks to everyone who asked questions.
Yeah, thank you again. And if you've enjoyed the talk tonight, the lecture series will continue till the end of August. So you can also sign up for a talk next week, which will be given by Dr. Dunhuang. And yes, it was in the previous slide if you want those details, but they're also online. So it's Dr. Dunhuang on August the 11th, followed by Dr. Ping Fong from Seattle on the 18th. And then the final talk will be delivered by Dr. Fan Jeremy Zhang on the 25th. So yes, thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Sia, for helping with the organization of the talks. And thank you, Amanda. Bye.